How to install and dual boot Linux on your Mac. Whether you need a customizable operating system or a better environment for software development, you can get it by installing Linux on your Mac. Linux is incredibly versatile, it's used to run everything from smartphones to supercomputers. And you can install it on your MacBook Pro, iMac, or even your Mac Mini. Apple adding Boot Camp to macOS made it easy for people to dual boot Windows. But installing Linux is another matter entirely. Follow the steps below to learn how to do this. Your Mac offers excellent performance, superb battery life, and long durability. The hardware on a Mac is difficult to match, which makes it an incredibly powerful machine for running Linux. What's more, Linux breathes life into old Macs that are no longer eligible for macOS updates. Rather than letting your old MacBook Pro turn into an expensive paperweight, install the latest version of Linux and keep it going for years to come. There are many different versions of Linux available, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we suggest installing Ubuntu on your Mac. Ubuntu is the most popular Linux distribution, which means there are lots of active support communities available if you ever need help. Curious about Ubuntu, but not sure where to start? Everything you could possibly need to get started with the latest version of Ubuntu is right here. Written in easy to understand, plain English, with a dual boot system. Both macOS and Linux are installed on your Mac. Hold Option while your computer boots up to choose which operating system to use. The main difference between a dual boot system and a virtual machine. If you want to run multiple operating systems on one machine, you can either dual boot or use a virtual machine. But which option is better for your case? If you don't plan to ever use macOS again, you might want to completely replace it with Linux instead. That way, none of your storage is used up by its system files. However, if you ever change your mind, it's difficult and time-consuming to restore macOS again in the future. This is especially true since Linux writes over the macOS recovery partition. For that reason, we recommend you dual boot Linux on your Mac. If you're really certain you don't want to do that, just skip the partition step in the instructions below. To install Linux on your Mac, you need a USB flash drive with at least 2 GB of storage. You'll erase the flash drive in a future step to put an Ubuntu installer on it. So make sure you've backed up any important files first. Use an Ethernet adapter to connect your Mac to the internet. This is important, because your Wi-Fi may not work in Ubuntu without third-party drivers. Similarly, iMac users should get hold of a USB keyboard or mouse. In case Bluetooth doesn't work, if you plan to dual boot your Mac with Linux, you also need to make sure you have enough free storage. Go to Apple menu greater than about this Mac greater than storage to check that you have at least 25 GB free, but preferably more. Finally, make a backup of your Mac. You shouldn't lose any data by installing Linux in a dual boot partition. However, if something goes wrong, you may need to erase your entire Mac to fix it. If you plan to replace macOS with Linux, rather than creating a dual boot system, use Carbon Copy Cloner to back up your macOS recovery partition. Here's how to delete the recovery partition on your Mac if necessary. Plus the process of restoring the recovery partition. For a dual boot system, which we strongly recommend, you need to create a Linux partition on your Mac's hard drive. If you don't want to create a dual boot system, skip ahead to the next step. In fact, to dual boot Linux on a Mac, you need 2 extra partitions, one for Linux and a second for swap space. The swap partition must be as big as the amount of RAM your Mac has. Check this by going to Apple menu greater than about this Mac. Use the plus button to create a new partition. Name it Ubuntu and set the format to MS-DOS FAT. Give it as much space as you want to use for Linux. Repeat the steps above to create another partition. Name this partition swap and set the format to MS-DOS FAT, again. Make the size match the amount of RAM in your Mac. This might be 4 GB or 8 GB. For instance, if you can't create new partitions, it could be because FileVault is encrypting your hard drive. Go to System Preferences greater than Security and Privacy greater than FileVault to turn it off. The standard boot manager on your Mac doesn't always work with Ubuntu. This means you need to install a third-party boot manager instead, which will let you easily choose between macOS or Linux when you start up your computer. Thus, your next step is to download Refined, which is the boot manager we recommend. To install Refined, you need to temporarily disable System Integrity Protection. There are more reasons to leave macOS System Integrity Protection on than turn it off. But turning it off is easy. With SIP disabled, open Terminal from the Utilities folder in Applications, or search for it using Spotlight. Next time you restart your Mac, the Refined menu should appear automatically. If it doesn't, hold Option while booting up to load your boot manager. Download the latest version of Ubuntu as a disk image from the Ubuntu website. You need to use a third-party app to create a USB installer from the Ubuntu disk image. One of the simplest apps for this is Balanature, but you can use anything you like. Insert your USB flash drive and Balanature should automatically select it. If it doesn't, click Select Target or change to select the flash drive yourself. Click Flash and enter your administrator password to erase the USB flash drive and create an Ubuntu USB installer. Restart your Mac while holding Option and reinsert the USB flash drive directly into your computer. When the bootloader appears, use the arrow keys to select the BootFE option and hit Enter. Use this opportunity to test Ubuntu on your Mac. Keep in mind that because it's running from your USB flash drive, it may be slow. Since Ubuntu can't use your Mac's Wi-Fi by default, use an Ethernet adapter to connect to the internet. In 2018, Apple introduced the T2 security chip to new Macs. This advancement might stop you from booting other operating systems on your machine. If you experience any boot issues, follow Apple's instructions to disable the T2 chip. Follow the on-screen prompts to choose your language and keyboard layout. Choose a normal installation and select the option to install third-party software. You need to connect your Mac to the internet using an Ethernet cable to install this software, which makes functions like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth work. Then click Continue. On the next screen, you need to identify and select the Ubuntu partition you created. Unfortunately, there are no recognizable partition names. So look for a device with FAT32 in the name that matches the partition size. Measured in MB. Double-click to select it and choose Use as ext4 journaling file system. Set the mount point to, and check the box to format the partition. Click OK. In the pop-up alert, click Continue to write previous changes to the disk. Now identify your swap partition, which should also have FAT32 in the name. Double-click it and choose to use as swap area. Then click OK. Open the device for bootloader installation drop-down menu and select your Ubuntu partition again. The name should match what you selected for it from the table above. Take a moment to ensure you selected the correct partitions. Then click Install Now. Click Continue in the pop-up alert to confirm you want to write changes to those disks. Finally, follow the on-screen prompts to choose your time zone and create a user account. Then wait for the installation to complete. Be warned, this erases everything from your Mac, including the operating system and the recovery partition. Follow the on-screen prompts to set the correct time zone and create a user account. Then wait for the installation to complete. Congratulations! You successfully installed Linux on your MacBook Pro, iMac, or Mac Mini. If you chose to dual boot Linux on your Mac, hold Option while booting up to choose between macOS and Ubuntu. Switching from macOS to Linux. It might not be as difficult as you think. Try these tips to get an instant Mac feel in Linux. By adding some familiar macOS features to Ubuntu, you'll make the most of Linux on your Mac in no time. Text source, makeuseof.com.